Hello and welcome back to the show, or if this is your first time joining us, well, strap in because today we're diving headfirst into a topic that's about as fun as a surprise root canal, the most dangerous countries in the world. Now, before you start planning your next off-the-beaten-path vacation, we're basing this entirely on the 2024 Global Peace Index, which, let's be honest, doesn't exactly scream beach read. This index, you see, is not messing around. It's like the world's most depressing travel brochure, evaluating nations based on factors like ongoing conflicts, societal safety, levels of militarization. Basically, all the things your mother warned you about. And while I'd love to tell you it's all sunshine and rainbows out there, that some countries just had a rough year, the truth is, well, let's just say the world's got some serious issues. So, over the next little while, we'll be taking a deep dive, and I do mean deep, into the 20 countries that, according to this index, are the most dangerous on Earth. We'll be exploring the reasons behind their rankings, from ongoing wars and political instability to, well, let's just say some truly mind-boggling levels of internal conflict. So buckle up, kids, because it's about to get real. And kicking off our list at number one, the winner, if you can even call it that, is Yemen. Now, if you're thinking, Yemen, where's that again? Well, first off, get out a map, you uncultured swine. But more importantly, Yemen's been locked in a brutal civil war since 2014. And it's about as fun as a barrel full of rabid badgers. We're talking widespread famine, diseases running rampant, and a humanitarian crisis so severe it would make even the most jaded dictator shed a tear. I mean, imagine a country where simply getting access to food, water, basic medical care is a daily struggle, where children are dying from preventable diseases because the healthcare system has been bombed back to the Stone Age. That's Yemen, folks. And the truly heartbreaking part, this isn't some natural disaster, some act of God. This is entirely man-made, a conflict fueled by internal power struggles and foreign intervention. And the worst part? It doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon, so Yemen sits atop our list, a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked conflict and the human cost of political ambition. Next up, at number two, we have Sudan. Now, you might remember Sudan from such hits as the Darfur genocide and that country that split in two. And while, yes, South Sudan did break away back in 2011, let's be clear, things haven't exactly been a walk in the park for either Sudan. We're talking armed conflicts galore, particularly between the Sudanese armed forces and a delightful little group called the Rapid Support Forces, who sound like they should be delivering pizzas, not, wreaking havoc. This latest bout of violence has resulted in, and I'm using official terminology here, a whole lot of bad stuff. We're talking massive civilian casualties, people being forced to flee their homes like they're playing a real-life and far less fun game of Monopoly. And just to add a cherry on top of this already terrible Sunday, the entire region is facing a severe humanitarian crisis, because apparently war and displacement weren't enough to deal with. The situation in Sudan is a stark reminder that even when a conflict fades from the headlines, the suffering continues. It's a complex web of political power struggles, ethnic tensions, and good old-fashioned violence, and sadly there's no easy solution in sight. Coming in at a solid number three, we have South Sudan. Now, you might think that after finally getting their independence back in 2011, after decades of conflict, the good people of South Sudan would be kicking back, sipping cocktails with tiny umbrellas and enjoying their hard-earned freedom. Well, if you thought that, you clearly haven't been paying attention, because South Sudan seems to have missed the memo on how to not be a war-torn nation. You see, instead of peace and prosperity, South Sudan has been locked in a brutal civil war almost since its inception. We're talking internal conflicts, political instability, and a whole lot of violence. It's like they took all the worst parts of being a country and decided to bottle it up and sell it as a national identity. And the result? Well, let's just say it's not pretty. We're talking about a country facing a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. Millions of people are displaced, facing hunger, disease, and the constant threat of violence. It's a situation so dire it would make even the most optimistic person want to crawl into a hole and cry. But hey, at least they're not Yemen, right? Chapter 4, Afghanistan, a land scarred by war. Well, look who it is at number 4, Afghanistan. Now, some might call it an overachiever for consistently ranking high on this list. But let's be honest, it's less winning and more stuck in a never-ending cycle of misery. Because let's face it, Afghanistan has been a battleground for, well, basically forever. We're talking decades of conflict, invasions, occupations, and more internal strife than a teenage angst convention. And while the Taliban may have swept back into power in 2021, promising peace and stability, it seems like they forgot to send the memo to the rest of the country. Because Afghanistan is still grappling with violence, a struggling economy, and more human rights violations than you can shake a stick at. It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube by hitting it with a hammer. Messy, ineffective, and likely to make things worse. So, yeah, Afghanistan remains a dangerous place, plagued by the ghosts of conflicts past and the harsh realities of the present. It's a country crying out for peace, stability, and maybe a good therapist. Chapter 5, Ukraine, a nation under siege. And coming in at number 5, a new entry, but certainly not a welcome one, is Ukraine. Now, unless you've been living under a rock, you know exactly why Ukraine has skyrocketed to the top of this list. I'm talking, of course, about the ongoing conflict that rhymes with Russia's questionable decision-making. Since early 2022, Ukraine has been grappling with a full-scale invasion, turning what was once a vibrant democracy into a war-torn battleground. We're talking cities reduced to rubble, millions displaced, and a level of human suffering that's difficult to comprehend. It's like watching a real-life disaster movie, only with less CGI and far more tragic consequences. And while the Ukrainian people have shown incredible resilience and determination in the face of this aggression, the conflict continues to rage on with no end in sight. The situation in Ukraine is a stark reminder of the fragility of peace and the devastating consequences of unchecked aggression. It's a conflict that has sent shockwaves through the world, and its impact will be felt for generations to come. Chapter 6, Democratic Republic of the Congo, a land of endless conflict. Coming in at number 6, we have the Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC, for those who don't want to pull a muscle trying to pronounce it. Now, you might think with a name like Democratic Republic, things would be, democratic and republic-y, but you'd be wrong, because the DRC has been plagued by violence and instability for decades, earning it the unfortunate nickname of the Heart of Darkness. And it's not hard to see why. The country is rife with armed groups, all vying for power and control of its vast natural resources. It's like a real-life game of Risk, only instead of plastic pieces, we're talking about real human lives being lost. And the worst part, these conflicts have fueled a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. We're talking millions displaced, facing hunger, disease, and the constant threat of violence. The DRC is a country trapped in a cycle of conflict fueled by poverty, corruption, and a whole lot of guns. It's a situation that demands international attention and intervention, but sadly it often gets overshadowed by other global crises. Chapter 7, Russia, the bear in the room. And at number 7 we have Russia. Now, you might be thinking, hold on a minute, isn't Russia supposed to be a global superpower, a land of vodka, bears, and questionable election interference? And to that I say yes, and also yes. But Russia's recent actions, particularly its little special military operation in Ukraine, has put it firmly on the not-so-peaceful list. I mean, invading your neighbor tends to do that, doesn't it? And let's not forget about the whole crackdown on internal dissent, the suppression of free speech, and the general air of you'd better not criticize the government that's been wafting through the air like a particularly pungent brand of cologne. So while Russia might have the nukes and the military might, it seems like they've also got a bit of a problem with, shall we say, playing nicely with others. And until they figure out that invading other countries and suppressing their own people isn't exactly a recipe for global stability, well, they're going to keep finding themselves on lists like this. Chapter 8, Syria, a nation in ruins. Coming in at number 8, a country that needs no introduction but sadly deserves a moment of silence, is Syria. For over a decade now, Syria has been synonymous with one thing: brutal, unrelenting civil war. It all started with peaceful protests back in 2011, a cry for democracy and freedom in a region often starved of both. But those protests were met with violence. and things spiraled out of control faster than a shopping cart with a wobbly wheel. Fast forward to today, and Syria is a shell of its former self. We're talking cities reduced to rubble, millions displaced, and a death toll that's difficult to even comprehend. It's a humanitarian catastrophe of epic proportions, a conflict that has drawn in foreign powers, fueled the rise of extremist groups, and left an entire generation scarred by violence. The situation in Syria is a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and the devastating consequences of unchecked violence. It's a tragedy that demands a global response, but sadly, it seems like the world has grown weary of watching. Chapter 9, Israel, a land of contested truths. And at number 9, we have Israel, a country that needs no introduction, but often sparks more debate than a family dinner with your conspiracy theorist uncle. Now look, I'm not here to take sides in a conflict that's been raging for decades, but I will say this. Being in a constant state of tension with your neighbors doesn't exactly scream peaceful paradise. And let's be honest, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is about as messy and complicated as a plate of spaghetti after a toddler has gotten their hands on it. We're talking territorial disputes, religious differences, political maneuvering, and a whole lot of finger-pointing, and sadly, it's the everyday people who get caught in the middle, facing violence, uncertainty, and a future that feels as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. So, while Israel might have a booming tech industry and beautiful beaches, it's also a country grappling with deep-seated divisions and a conflict that seems as intractable as ever. Coming in at number 10, we have Mali, a country that's about as landlocked as a goldfish in a bowl, but unlike your average pet goldfish, Mali has a lot more to worry about than just dirty water and the occasional overfeeding. You see, Mali has become a hotbed of extremist activity, with groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS setting up shop and causing all sorts of mayhem. We're talking attacks on civilians, kidnappings, bombings, the whole shebang. It's like they're trying to win a Worst Neighbor Ever award, and sadly, they're facing some stiff competition. And as if that wasn't enough, Mali is also grappling with internal conflicts, political instability, and a whole lot of poverty. It's like trying to juggle chainsaws while riding a unicycle on a tightrope over a pit of despair. So yeah, Mali's got a lot going on, and none of it's good. It's a country in desperate need of peace, stability, and maybe a good therapist, or at least a really good security system. Ahoy there, mateys! At number 11, it's Somalia, a country that's practically synonymous with pirates. But while the whole sailing the high seas, stealing your cargo thing might make for a good Hollywood movie, the reality in Somalia is far less glamorous and far more grim. For starters, Somalia has been without a functioning central government for decades. Decades! It's like a group project where everyone forgot to do the work. And now the teacher is really, really mad. And into this power vacuum stepped a delightful group known as Al-Shabaab, which is about as fun as a root canal without anesthesia. We're talking bombings, assassinations, and a general disregard for human life that would make even the most hardened dictator blush. And let's not forget about the devastating famines and humanitarian crises that plague this country. So, while Somalia might conjure up images of swashbuckling pirates, the reality is a country ravaged by conflict, poverty, and a whole lot of bad decisions. It's a situation that demands international attention, but sadly, it often gets lost in the shuffle of global crises. Coming in at a solid number 12, we have North Korea, a country that's about as easy to understand as a raccoon trying to use a typewriter. It's ruled by a man who looks like he's auditioning for a dictator-themed boy band and has a haircut that could only be achieved with a bowl and a weed whacker. But haircuts aside, North Korea is no laughing matter. They've got a nuclear arsenal that's growing faster than a teenager in a buffet line, and they're not afraid to flaunt it like it's a winning lottery ticket. And let's not forget about the human rights record, which is about as abysmal as you'd expect from a country that treats its citizens like mushrooms, kept in the dark and fed. Well, you get the idea. So, while the rest of the world is busy arguing about TikTok bans and who wore it better, North Korea is over there building nukes and oppressing its people. It's a situation that's both terrifying and absurd, like a Monty Python sketch gone horribly wrong. Chapter 13, Iraq, a nation haunted by war. Coming in at number 13, we have Iraq, a country that's been through more regime changes than a reality TV show. From Saddam Hussein to the US-led invasion to the rise of ISIS, Iraq has seen more than its fair share of turmoil. And sadly, the echoes of those conflicts are still being felt today. While the defeat of ISIS was a major victory, Iraq is still grappling with sectarian violence, political instability, and a whole lot of corruption. It's like trying to rebuild a house of cards in the middle of a wind tunnel, challenging to say the least. And let's not forget about the millions of Iraqis who have been displaced by conflict, living in poverty and uncertainty. Iraq's story is a tragic reminder of the long-lasting consequences of war and the challenges of rebuilding a nation torn apart by violence. It's a country with immense potential, but it's going to take a lot more than just military might to heal the wounds of the past. Chapter 14, Central African Republic, a cycle of violence. Coming in at number 14, we have the Central African Republic, or CAR, a country that's sadly more famous for its conflicts than its natural beauty. For years, CAR has been locked in a cycle of violence fueled by religious tensions, ethnic divisions, and a whole lot of poverty. Armed groups roam the countryside, terrorizing civilians and vying for control of resources. It's like a real-life Mad Max movie, only with fewer explosions and far more human suffering. And as if that wasn't enough, CAR is also grappling with a humanitarian crisis of epic proportions. We're talking about millions of people facing hunger, disease, and displacement. The situation in CAR is a stark reminder of the human cost of conflict and the devastating consequences of unchecked violence. It's a country in desperate need of peace, stability, and a whole lot of international attention. Chapter 15. Burkina Faso, the Sahel's spreading crisis. Coming in at a depressing number 15, we have Burkina Faso, another Sahel nation grappling with a surge in extremist violence. It seems like extremist groups like those pesky telemarketers have figured out that the Sahel is the place to be if you're looking to wreak havoc and spread chaos. And Burkina Faso, sadly, has become their latest target. We're talking attacks on civilians, kidnappings, and a general disregard for human life that would make even the most hardened dictator say, okay, that's a bit much. This surge in violence has displaced millions of people, creating a humanitarian crisis that's stretching the country's resources to the breaking point. It's a situation that demands international attention and intervention, but sadly, it often gets overshadowed by other global crises. Burkina Faso is a stark reminder that the fight against extremism is far from over and that the consequences of inaction can be devastating. Chapter 16. Myanmar, a coup and a crisis. Coming in at number 16, we have Myanmar, a country that's gone from a fledgling democracy to a full-blown military dictatorship faster than you can say coup d'etat. Remember those heartwarming stories about Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate who fought for democracy? Well, those are looking a bit awkward now, aren't they? Because in February 2021, the Myanmar military decided they weren't too keen on the whole democracy thing and staged a coup, throwing Aung San Suu Kyi in jail and cracking down on dissent with the subtlety of a rhinoceros in a china shop. The result? Widespread protests, brutal crackdowns, and a whole lot of people wishing they could get a refund on the whole transition to democracy thing. And let's not forget about the Rohingya crisis, a textbook example of ethnic cleansing that's been ongoing for years. So yeah, Myanmar's not exactly having its best moment right now. It's a country mired in conflict, repression, and a whole lot of bad decisions. Chapter 17, Nigeria, a giant grappling with insecurity. Coming in at a not-so-lucky number 17, we have Nigeria, a country that's often described as the giant of Africa. But even giants have their problems, and Nigeria's got a whole bunch of them. From the Boko Haram insurgency in the northeast to farmer-herder conflicts in the middle belt to oil theft and militancy in the south, Nigeria is practically bursting at the seams with security challenges. It's like a game of whack-a-mole. Only instead of moles, it's armed groups, and instead of a mallet, it's still a lot of violence. And let's not forget about the rampant corruption, poverty and inequality that plague this nation. It's enough to make even the most optimistic person throw their hands up in despair. But despite all of its challenges, Nigeria remains a country of immense potential. It's got a young, vibrant population, a wealth of natural resources, and a spirit that refuses to be broken. So, while Nigeria might be grappling with some serious issues, don't count it out just yet. This giant might be down, but it's not out. Chapter 18, Colombia, a long road to peace. Coming in at number 18, we have Colombia, a country that's practically synonymous with coffee, cocaine, and conflict. For decades, Colombia was ravaged by a brutal civil war between the government, leftist guerrillas like the FARC, and right-wing paramilitaries. It was a conflict fueled by ideology, drugs, and a whole lot of violence. But in 2016, something remarkable happened. A peace deal was signed between the government and the FARC, raising hopes for a brighter future. However, the path to peace has been anything but smooth. Dissident FARC factions, other armed groups, and criminal organizations are still vying for control, particularly in rural areas. It's like trying to put together a puzzle where someone keeps swapping out the pieces. Despite these challenges, Colombia has made significant strides in recent years. The economy is growing, violence is down, and there's a sense of cautious optimism in the air. Colombia's story is a reminder that even the most deeply entrenched conflicts can be resolved and that peace is always worth striving for. Chapter 19, Palestine, a land without a state. Coming in at number 19, we have Palestine, a land that's both geographically small and geopolitically enormous. Because Palestine is at the heart of one of the world's most intractable conflicts, a conflict that's been raging for decades and shows no signs of abating. Caught between Israel and a hard place, the Palestinian people face daily challenges, checkpoints, settlements, and the constant threat of violence. It's a situation that breeds frustration, anger, and a sense of hopelessness. The lack of a two-state solution, the ongoing occupation, and the cycle of violence have created a powder keg that could explode at any moment. The international community has a responsibility to push for a just and lasting peace, a peace that recognizes the rights and aspirations of both Israelis and Palestinians. Chapter 20, Ethiopia, a nation divided. And finally, rounding out our list at number 20, we have Ethiopia, a country that's often associated with ancient history, delicious coffee, and more recently, a brutal civil war. In 2020, conflict erupted in the Tigray region, pitting the Ethiopian government against the Tigray People's Liberation Front, or TPLF. What started as a regional conflict quickly spiraled into a full-blown humanitarian crisis, with widespread reports of atrocities, ethnic cleansing, and famine. The conflict has displaced millions of people, destabilized the entire Horn of Africa, and left a trail of destruction in its wake. While a ceasefire was declared in November 2022, the situation remains fragile, with ongoing reports of human rights abuses and a desperate need for humanitarian assistance. Ethiopia's story is a tragic reminder of the human cost of conflict and the fragility of peace. It's a country with immense potential, but it's facing an uphill battle to heal the wounds of war and build a more stable and prosperous future. So, there you have it, the top 20 most dangerous countries in the world, according to the 2024 Global Peace Index. It's not exactly a list you want to be on, is it? These rankings are based on the 2024 Global Peace Index, which assesses various indicators to determine the relative peacefulness of nations. It's a sobering reminder that while we might be living in a relatively peaceful time, conflict, violence, and instability are still very much a part of our world. But hey, at least you learned something today, right? And if you're planning any international travel anytime soon, well, you might want to consult this list before you book your flights. Stay informed and stay safe.